Hey everybody, and welcome back to another video. This time a roundup of the Spanish Grand Prix, which was, I thought, a really fascinating weekend. By the way, I hope you can hear me a little bit clearer this time, because I have, thanks to all of your feedback, invested in a microphone, which you can see me wearing. I hope that reduces the wind noise that we've suffered with over the last couple of videos. So thank you for the feedback. Keep it coming. I appreciate it. The Spanish Grand Prix, I thought, was a really interesting weekend for lots of reasons. I was lucky enough and privileged enough to be in the commentary box for the BBC over Friday and Saturday, where we presided over what was a fascinating qualifying session. Of course, it was Lando Norris that came out on top, but nothing in it. And I think that was the big story of the weekend, that there was nothing in it. So in the course of this video, what I want to do is talk about the things that happened, of course, the big storylines that came up, but also I want to ask and hopefully answer the question, do McLaren need to learn how to win races? Think about that one. We'll come back to that in a moment, because this video is brought to you by SeedStream. SeedStream is an app which right now is packaged up especially for you, the Formula One fan. It's a place where you can get all of your Formula One content, from news stories and videos, social media, everything put in one place. So you don't have to go searching around the web to lots of different platforms to find it. All the most trusted, enjoyable content that you could possibly want. In the future, we hope it may well roll out into other sports and beyond. But right now, it's centered around you, the Formula One fan. So go get it, go download it. It's absolutely free. You'll find the link in the description of this video, or just search SeedStream in any of the app stores. Right, let's get back to the Spanish Grand Prix. The Spanish Grand Prix has been an indicator to some extent of just how close the battles are now at the front of the field. Because what we saw in Spain, in Barcelona, was that Red Bull, in the hands of Max Verstappen at least, and that's another story altogether, in the hands of Max Verstappen, Red Bull were back to their best. And what I mean by that is they have a car that was working very well around this circuit, certainly by the time they got to qualifying, after a few early troubles on Friday. They've got a team that's operating incredibly well too. Pit stops generally were very, very good. The decision making across the weekend and through the race also operationally absolutely perfect, pretty much as they've been over most of the season and most of previous seasons, if we're really honest about it. I can't actually remember the last time we saw mistakes being made by Max or Red Bull on a consistent basis. I mean, there may be the odd one. I can't actually think of any right now. Generally, they've been operationally brilliant, and that's a big part of the reason why they've done so well. So from a Red Bull point of view, things are looking up, at least on one side of the garage. Now, I spent a large part of my time in commentary talking about the fact that Red Bull really needs Sergio Perez to up his game, because the Constructors' Championship, at least, is now potentially under threat, because you've got the likes of McLaren and Ferrari, maybe even Mercedes now, who are going to be taking points away from them and maybe even challenging for race wins as the season rolls on. Now, if they've got two cars in that fight, particularly I'm looking at McLaren, although Oscar Piastri had a difficult weekend this time out, if they've got two cars in the fight as the season rolls on and Red Bull only have one, it won't take very long for the lead that they have in the Constructors' Championship to fall away. Now, I spent most of my time in commentary saying things like that. However, today, even though Sergio Perez had another disastrous weekend, Red Bull still came away with more points as a team than anybody else. And so I wonder actually if Max Verstappen is enough for Red Bull. If he can consistently start bringing in the 25 points, maybe even 26 points with the fastest lap, is that going to be enough over the course of the season with the advantage they've already got to just maintain it? Maybe that's the way Red Bull are thinking about this. They don't need to put too much pressure and too much consideration into Sergio Perez, and they can literally put all their eggs in one basket and hope that Max Verstappen will be enough to bring them both the drivers and constructors' world titles. We will keep an eye on that one, and only time will tell. But a difficult weekend again for Sergio. It's not looking good for him, and psychologically he will be suffering massively off the back of another poor weekend, when all of the questions, like the ones that I'm just posing right here, start to be centered around him and his performances, despite just getting himself a new contract. Strange one. There we go. That's for another video. Let's talk about Mercedes, because Mercedes obviously took a giant leap forward in Montreal. They now talk about having discovered the direction in which they need to go, something they've been missing for a long, long time. And that has given them so much confidence that they can start that development path. They can start bringing components and working in the wind tunnel and behind the scenes at bringing new parts to the car with a very clear viewpoint and a very clear direction on which way they need to be going with it to bring that performance to the racetrack. And we're seeing it already. It was wonderful to see Lewis Hamilton feeling so buoyed after a great weekend, and even George Russell, who had the most amazing start. Wow, where did he come from? But at the end of that, to finish fourth, which of course was where he started, I think he was a little bit disappointed in one sense, having led the race at one stage, but actually not so much, because the bigger picture is that Mercedes are pretty much back. Well, let's talk about McLaren then, because I teed this video up by saying, do McLaren need to learn how to win races? Which might seem like an odd thing to say, particularly given they won one recently. But what I mean by that is that when it comes to how close things are right now, what are you doing, mate? What are you rolling in? When it comes to a championship, which is so close as it is right now, I mean, even if you take away the championship, but individual race weekends, the performance between the top few teams is now mighty close. We've got teams that have all found their feet in a stable set of regulations. Of course, Red Bull, who were already operating at an incredible level, had, you know, that diminishing returns theory where they have less potential to improve than the likes of, say, Mercedes and McLaren, who started a lot further back and have taken those giant leaps to now become on par with the likes of Red Bull. When you get into that type of situation where the performance is going to swing just fractionally, one race weekend to the next, depending on the circuit and the conditions and how it suits your car and driver, when you get to that kind of scenario, you're talking about the very finest of margins about who actually comes out on top. And if we look back to Montreal, it was obviously difficult because the conditions were challenging. It was raining heavily at times. It was going from dry to wet and back again with not too much notice. In those situations, you're very much relying on the team and driver and their experience in both of those areas to make very difficult decisions, sometimes under massive pressure, and to operationally deliver excellence in the toughest of conditions. And that was exactly what Red Bull did out in Montreal, which was what won them the race, despite, for large periods of that Grand Prix, not having the fastest car. And you could also argue that McLaren, who did have the fastest car for large periods, and Mercedes with George Russell at times, they lost that race, or they didn't win that race, because perhaps they didn't operate at the very highest level. We talked in the last video about mistakes that were made at McLaren that perhaps could have meant that the result was different. Well, Red Bull didn't get any of those things wrong. They did everything right. They operated beautifully, as they've done consistently for a long period of time now. And I think today, out in Barcelona, exactly the same thing happened. They shouldn't have won that race, all things considered, because I don't believe they had necessarily the fastest car. Yes, it's definitely up there or thereabouts. There's almost nothing between the Red Bull and the McLaren. In the hands of Lando Norris and in the hands of Max Verstappen, almost nothing between them, which is great for us as fans. But actually, Lando was on pole and he had a few meters of an advantage off the start, yet he didn't make it count. Unfortunately for Lando, there was a little bit of excess wheel spin in the second phase of the start. That allowed Max to come alongside. And of course, George Russell, with that blistering start, got involved with his slipstream. So there were a couple of little things. And this time it may have been on the driver's side more so than the team's side. But if you flip over to look at Red Bull, again, they didn't really put a foot wrong with Max Verstappen or from an operational perspective. Now, if we're going to, as I said, get into a championship battle that's so close, McLaren need to get into that phase. They need to get into that scenario where they're the ones not making any mistakes. Now, I'm not being critical of McLaren at all here, because they're actually doing incredibly well, and the position they've got themselves into is testament to just how good the organisation is. The structure that's behind the scenes, what they've been building over time, is phenomenal. And I know from speaking to people in that organisation that there are great times ahead, championships coming their way because of what's been building, and I have total confidence and I can't wait for it to happen. But they've also had many, many years of not winning, of struggling to win, of rarely ever even getting on the podium, in fact. And what that does for you is it just puts an element of hesitation, a tiny lack of confidence in your decision-making abilities at times, both from a driving perspective, and we know that Lando Norris can be super self-critical at times, but also from a team perspective. When you're put under pressure like they were in Montreal to make a split-second decision which could have won them the race, they hesitated. They took a moment. They didn't have the confidence to be very clear and decisive and make that call. And yet I think Red Bull consistently have shown they can do that. And they're able to do that because they've done it over and over and over again. They've built a stack of evidence behind them to show themselves that they can do it, that they should believe in their data and they should trust in their people. McLaren haven't yet got that stack of evidence behind them to convince them to do those things yet. And we're talking about the tiniest of margins here. So please don't come at me, McLaren fans. I am one of the world's biggest McLaren fans right here. And it will come. You know, they will get to that point. The win in Miami was a huge step forward to building that evidence stack behind them. But it was one race. They need a few more of those, and they are coming. And the fact that the car is now on par with Red Bull, which I firmly believe it is one of the biggest steps in taking that giant leap forward. The team now need to get to a position where they have total belief in their own ability to make the right calls and the right decisions. They make a decision that they know is right for them without worrying too much about what's going on around them. Those are the kind of things that Red Bull do very well consistently. Pit stops have got to be excellent every single time, and they're pretty good, McLaren, of course, current world record holders, so we can't knock them too much, but the consistency is something that maybe they need to start thinking about and working on, and it will come over time. You never find somebody who becomes dominant in a sport overnight. They have to build up to it in any sport. They have to build up to it. You start winning races and it's occasional races. You start knocking on the door of winning, then you start getting the wins. And then over time, you gradually shift into becoming a serial winner, all the way through getting better at operating everything you do as an organization. That's where McLaren are right now. So when I say, do McLaren need to learn how to win? I absolutely believe they do. And I believe it's happening. They are learning how to win. Moments like today all feed into that process. Moments like in Montreal feed into the process of learning what it takes to become a serial winner. And yeah, of course, they'll be looking at the likes of Red Bull. They are the benchmark in this sport right now. They'll be taking things from them, learning things from them, putting it into their own processes and doing it the McLaren way. But I firmly believe that in the months, hopefully, certainly years to come, we will see McLaren back at the top of this sport consistently. So that's what I mean. Do McLaren need to learn how to win? I think the answer is yes. I think it's happening, but they haven't quite got there yet. But that's totally fine. It's coming. So I thought it was a really good Spanish Grand Prix weekend and something that gives us a huge amount of hope and excitement, not just for the rest of this season, but going into 2025 as well, before the regulations change in 26. Mercedes now joining the party. A difficult weekend for Ferrari, but we know how quick they can be and how quick they will be at certain circuits. And I'm in this situation now where I believe we are at peak Formula One, where at certain circuits, the performance advantage might swing fractionally towards one team or driver. We go to another circuit and it might just swing back the other way. That is the dream in Formula One. It's what we've been crying out for months, if not years in this sport. We've now got it. We're in the midst of it. So let's enjoy it. Let's appreciate it for what it is. And whilst we're on that subject, if you haven't yet checked out the SeedStream Formula One app, that will only enhance your experience of all of this. Anyone who's taking part in the SeedStream Predictions League, wow, it is close. We had somebody, I've got to give a big shout out to somebody who's called themselves The Hawk, who currently sits at the top of that table, who now for the third week out of 10 races has managed to accurately predict all 5 drivers correctly, getting the massive bonus points that comes with that and putting themselves right at the top of the table. Fair play to you. But it does mean that anyone who hasn't yet taken part in the SeedStream Predictions League, it is not too late. Such a big bonus if you manage to get all 5 right. I suggest you go and do it. The app's totally free. Download it from any of your app stores or find the link in the description of this video. That's it for this week, guys. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you enjoyed the Spanish Grand Prix, and we don't need to wait very long for the next one. It's Austria up in just a few days' time. I'll see you then. Ta-da.